Hello and welcome to Books Up Close. My name's Chris Lloyd. This is the close reading show for readers, writers, and anyone interested in how texts get made. In today's episode, I talked to Oluwaseun Olayiwola about his poem Strange Beach, the first one in the book, from the 2025 book of the same name. Seun is a poet, critic, choreographer, and performer based in London. His creative and critical work has been published in the Poetry Review, PN Review, the Telegraph, the TLS, and elsewhere. His debut collection was published by Fitzcarraldo Editions in the UK and Soft Skull Press in the US. Since publication, Strange Beach has won an Eric Gregory Award and was a Poetry Book Society Winter 2025 Special Commendation. Seun, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. That last one is such a mouthful. I think it's the first time I've heard it read. It is so many. Yeah, it's a mouthful, that one.
Yeah, those words, they don't sound grammatically like they should go together. But anyway, they do.
Yeah. I mean, you can just stack words up together. Like generally, I think is a rule I'm figuring out. You can just put like nouns. All nouns are also like adjectives. So you can just put everything you want in front of the final noun. And it can grammatically like work.
It can, whether it should.
But should it? Yeah, exactly.
Welcome. It's so good to have you. Obviously, you know I'm deeply interested in this book and your work, so I'm really excited to talk to you. And I had your Fitzcarraldo cousin Sasha on here recently too. So like these episodes, I feel like can speak to each other in interesting ways. This is just me saying, Fitzcarraldo, please just get me involved somehow. I don't know. If I get enough of your authors on, will you like give me something like a book contract? I don't know. Yeah, it's lovely to have you. So today we're talking about the opening poem from your collection, Strange Beach. We'll come back to that in a minute. There's a couple of Strange Beach poems, and what we do with that is interesting. But before we go there, how do you feel about close reading as an activity, a practice?
I mean, it's interesting you talk about Fitzcarraldo, because I feel like when we're thinking about close reading, I feel like there are some of the, like when you think about particularly maybe their nonfiction work, or even sometimes their fiction work, because, you know, the lines between often and purposefully blur. It feels like one of the presses, I think, where close reading is really not just critical practice, but a creative practice that is part of representing lived experience, or is part of the text itself, and is meant to be just as vivifying and electric as, you know, kind of action, depending action, scenic action or lyric action. So that's where I'd start with that. And my personal feeling around close reading is, I mean, coming from being a critic, or coming from being a critic, it's one of my favorite. It's vital. That's what it is. It feels vital to me, particularly because I don't know. I mean, like, of course, I love when you can read a work and you read it once. It's like the first time encountering a work, and then it just feels as if it doesn't merit rereading, because it feels as if the writer has communicated something to you that you perhaps always sensed or felt in your body, but had never put into that sequence of symbols to make sense and kind of click it into something that maybe for you felt true. But I do think, I don't know, I find with close reading, it's when you take that line or two, or that sentence or that paragraph, and really dig deep, it actually becomes, the work is central, but it becomes the work of imagination that happens around that line also feels, I don't know, related to that experience that you had when you first read it. It's such that you begin, it's not that the quote becomes this static thing, but it's this thing that actually begins to structure your imagination, your life. Like right now I'm doing quite a close reading of Zora Neale Hurston, some of Zora Neale Hurston's short stories. And it's just these, you know, I've never really been a short story person, but being able to go back to her work and try to, I mean, this is the hard thing about criticism, because sometimes you have a thesis you're trying to point, and you look for work that confirms that. And then sometimes you have no thesis, you're just looking at work and something emerges. And I find her work to be so rich. And it's that close reading that, again, just it allows you to keep living lives with short, either whole stories or little paragraphs. And I think sometimes that depth can be not confusing, but that depth can be challenging for other people to encounter, if you believe language is maybe zero sum, or there's just one layer. And I think sometimes it can be thought that other interpretational faculties on a piece of work, that maybe it can often feel like close reading is to recreate the intention of the writer, which is important. And if you can divine that, often we can't know, and even writers don't know their own intentions with certain things. And so close reading, what's really exciting about it is it goes into impact. It really lives in the impact, and the impact is quite a generative space. And if you can stay with the impact that, lines as brief as, I don't know, desire goes traveling into the total dark of another's heart, looking for where it breaks off. And it's like, that's just one long line, but you can read, that's a line from Jory Graham's Lamento de Pascal from the Errancy. And I started going into all these kind of, thoughts about desire and darkness, right, into the total dark. And then I was thinking about her marriages and divorce, and then I was applying that to my life and in breaking up. But I was also looking at a line that was next to it about, the title provides protection from significance, which is somewhere else. And it's just like, close reading allows the web of literature to reveal itself to you. And I find that is such a generative place to be in. And if your writing is able to harness that power, I don't think it makes writing easy, but I definitely think it takes the pressure off. I think what the novelists have, which are just like this amazing kind of, they can just pull stuff out of the air. Like close reading, I think, is the opposite thing. You're generating that perhaps novelistic motion of the mind by starting with someone else's text.
That's fascinating. And I kind of picked the first Strange Beach poem from the book because it does do some of that stuff to me. And there was maybe some hesitation on my part, actually, that I was like, wait, I'm seeing a reference to this person or this idea or this thing in here. And I'm always like, is that me or is it the text? Right? I always like worry about how much is it just like my little lens that I'm looking on it, or what I've read recently, or who else I'm like looking at. But I like that way you've just said that the text comes alive in that way, right? If you stay close to it and you stay close to the words, that aliveness is generative of all kinds of conversations that aren't right or wrong, right? They are what they are. So I'm excited to talk about this poem in particular because I have many thoughts. I also am going to say to listeners, and maybe my students listening too, like, poems aren't here to be got, right? Like, it's not like I get this poem or don't get this poem. There are parts of it that I'm like, that like evokes something to me, but I'm not sure what it means, quote unquote, whatever. But even that sentence, like, what does a poem mean? I think is a redundant question. But it's just worth saying that, like, I picked this poem even while I don't feel like I've got a full handle on it, and I quite like that. I feel like that's not a bad thing. But I feel like we're in a world of, you have to like know, 2026 is a bad place, and it's about like knowing and certainty and definitiveness. And I'm like, or it's not.
Yeah, that I feel it's a lot. I'm writing a lot about this, but this is particularly just at the center and the core of experience is the clamoring obsession, clamoring fiery obsession. Now I'm just doing the thing I was talking about. We're just putting words in front of it. Clamoring, fiery, insistent, reckless obsession to believe that everything can be knowable, and the fundamental ontological stasis of of uncertainty, of the fact that we connect second to second to second, and we cannot know. And there is this thing in front of us. Well, we don't even know if it's in front of us because it's being shaped by every moment that we are. For every moment we're thinking about that thing, it's actually the moment of thinking creates the thing we're thinking about. So you just get like, this is the moment now. The future is occurring, and then we move into it, and it's no longer the future, and it becomes the past. Like this movement, this kind of tangled web of time is always occurring, and this happens in. I mean, I try to affect this entanglement in my poems, and to your point about poems needing to mean something. I mean, it must be one of the reasons poetry is not so always easily received, but I usually get past, being a critic, and this is something I also feel, even being a critic, I want to know what things mean. And even for someone who has, I think, I have quite an arch propensity, like I can kind of hover and kind of stay in the clouds and in the woo-woo and in the abstract for a little bit longer than I think the average person. And still I'm confronted by people's poems, and I want to shut down. But it really is a practice. I think the practice, I mean, a lot of the poets I'm really interested in really do investigate and work with this idea of negative capability, which is Keats's, I mean, I say dictum, but it's not really a dictum. He talked about it in referencing Shakespeare's work in just a letter to, was it his brother or was it to someone else? Which is just the idea that we can hold uncertainty, we can hold mystery, we can hold doubt without irritable reaching after fact or reason. It's a difficult place to be in.
It is a difficult place to be in. That is the ending to that.
Yeah.
Shall we hear you read the poem, and then we can
Yeah.
talk about maybe some of this in specific form?
Mm-hmm. So this is the first Strange Beach, of which there are three, which it just always brings me back to the first time I had, for a little bit, I was mentored by Kayo Chingonyi, poet and editor and multidisciplinary artist, actually, in different ways. And one of the first things he told me was like, are you sure you don't want to put like Strange Beach 1, Strange Beach 2, Strange Beach 3? Because people will find it difficult to index this because, of course, just the same title. Which, I mean, I'm really into that idea of naming poems the same or naming poems poem. I really like things like that. So yeah, this is Strange Beach, the first one. Strange Beach. Unable to get from the underneath side of the stones that flank the sand. The body. Blown from every direction into like a conch shell, where the echo of emotion in extremis floods the chamber, where once was a body willing to die inside of, longing. This is the obsession, this transatlantic voyage spread on the page like an oil spill, the blue and black arsenal of water hushing, inevitably. Was it worth it? Worth. It circles around you. The increasing gap between the surface of the water and the stillness you entirely inhabit so as to sink to the ocean floor, but properly, with no effect on velocity. Stingrays, desire, inseparability of light and dark. How beautiful you have been and are, giving your whole life to a pointless competition.
Gorgeous. Thank you for reading Strange Beach number 1. Strange Beach the first. No, but you're right. There's something about titles, and you know, I talk about this a lot with students of like, they want to jump straight in. I'm like, let's sit with the title. But if you sit with this title, you're like, okay, it's the title of the book. It's the title of the first poem. There's 3 of them with the same title. Suddenly you're like, oh, this must mean this is an important poem, right? This is a poem that's telling us the direction of the book or the direction of the work. And I'm like, oh, is it? Or is that like a, you know, a sleight of hand, if you like, a kind of a little, not a trick on your part, but a kind of like, yeah, look over there is what I think of, right? Drag Race reference, people, as like as a redirection. And then when you start the poem, the first line begins kind of like in the middle of things, right? You've got this M dash, unable to get from the underneath side of, and we can talk about that. But so it's even like the poem is not beginning, right? It's already in flux, in flow. And I've thought a lot about that, not only because, you know, we now live in a time where M dashes apparently are the sign of generative AI, right? But the kind of M dash is like leading us into the poem that has already begun without us. Suddenly kind of pushes up against the idea that like this is the title poem, right? This is the poem that gives us answers. So I really think there's something interesting there that already the book is kind of resisting some definitiveness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of my choreographic practice, which I tend to do in a lot of my dance works or choreographic works. I tend to start performances before the audience comes in, so that the audience feels like they're walking into an experience or an encounter. Not that the effect is that it creates the sense of not needing them, but that there is a world that is existing before they enter, and perhaps the sensation, the images, the action, the arc could continue and begin without them. And so there's this sense that what it does, it creates a sense of, I think, a little bit of pressure and a little bit of encounter. For me, that just feels more true, I suppose, to the experience of reading, or to the experience of emotions, or to the experience of people. Often the book deals a lot of like different lovers and coming in and out, and that is kind of something I write towards. And so there's this sense of coming in and slipping out that I think is really important, that I think you're picking up on in that first M dash. And then exactly right, the unable, right, unable to right is a kind of cancellation of that first week. There's a paradox, right? Because unable, which I think a lot about, like that first word. I mean, of course, I think about like the longevity of my writing practice, and I wonder, I was like, you want to, I think about it as like, what was that first thing of course you have other things you publish, but like if people are looking at like your books over time, like that first line, that first thing that broke the silence, as it were, of, and then you were, arrived or whatever. And this idea that unable starts with an M dash and starts with unable to get from the underneath side of the stones, and then refuses actually to have a kind of strong verb that's not attached to that fragment for at least a long part of the poem. It's an interesting choice. Yeah, I'm really into this idea of cancellation and the ways in which cancellation also, the paradox of describing, it's almost kind of like apophatic practices of describing, the way to describe God, in the cataphatic religion would be like, look at the things that do represent him, whereas like perhaps things like the cross or I don't know, prayer, these are things that let us know he's there, whereas like apophatic would be really looking at things that we know are not him, but that as a way of proving his presence still on. And I'm really into that idea, because what it does is highlight this kind of dialectic and this connection between, I don't know, almost kind of everything. And so I'm really into this idea of when things begin in negative or cancellations, how they still are able to approach or speak of the action that they are not taking, or the image they are not describing, or the things that are not happening. It makes me think of Toni Morrison, who begins, I forget which text it is. She begins with describing what is not there. There's a one of her opening paragraphs. It begins with like this not or this nor, and and she's accumulating force by continuing to say what is not happening. But of course, what happens is the reader imagines these things not happening. So you're asking them to imagine what is happening while also describing what isn't happening. And so the thing that isn't happening is actually happening, right? And it creates this one just beautiful sense of destabilization that just really feels like a place that's really easy for me as a writer to sit in. Now, I know that can be difficult for some people to they want to know the kind of positive force of the work, what is happening, who's doing what. And I don't know, it does come down, I guess, then at that point to taste.
Yeah, to taste, and also like the desire of what you think the book is in front of you. Like what you think it's for, in a way, right? Because unable to get from the underneath side of like two uns, right? Like you're really telling us like, no, you're not getting the thing. Whatever the thing is you think you're getting, you're not getting it. And not just the underside, which is what you might expect, but the underneath side of, which is like there's an extra bit in there that you're like the underneath side, and like, it's like when people say is like like does a tube have two holes or one, and you're like, what? Like it's this kind of like space-time thing, right? The underneath side, like what is the underneath? Like underneath already is the underneath, but the underneath side feels like a double negation in some kind of way of break the stones, break that flank the sand, the body, colon blown line. There's like another break from every direction. Like the poem is really breaking apart as you're emphasizing this right? The non, or the, if not the non, the resistance of the definitive, right? There's a whole set of like theory there that I don't even think I'm clever enough to pass out. But like it's not just a rejection of something, it's a kind of refusal of a definitive, if you like. And I like that flank the sand, comma, the body blown, that great alliteration, like the flank, the sand, the body blown from every direction. I don't know, the body blown. My first read, I was like, this is sexual now, right? But then the body blown from every direction like a conch shell, and you're like, oh, okay. Well, now it's like the body is sand, is like the body in pieces.
Yeah.
I don't know. Already in what 4 lines, you've amassed like lots of inference through the
Mm,
way the lines are even just appearing on the page, right? Like they're
mhm,
appearing in this kind of broken up way. You're not letting us have security, I guess, or like definitiveness in the lines.
mhm,
And I wonder,
mhm.
like, I don't know. You don't have to answer, but like how felt that is as you're writing it, or how much you were thinking ahead of what that looked like on the page. Did you see it on the page as you were writing? I guess.
I mean, I started this poem. It is actually one of the first poems. Would that be true? It's one of the earliest poems I wrote actually before I moved to England. And I remember it was a poem about America. I think I'd written it in 2016 when Trump had just become elected,
Mm.
and which I believe was also the same summer Philando Castile was murdered. And I just remember coming back from the American Dance Festival, and I just remember feeling like I wanted to write something, and my friend had just gotten, right, yes, so this would be 16 actually, because my friend had just bought me Citizen by Claudia Rankine. And I just remember reading that and feeling like, which is where the epigraph and the title for the book comes from. I remember reading that and feeling I wanted to write something that kind of acknowledged something about the strange beach, something about race and the moment I felt we were in. And this was really before I considered myself a poet. So I
Mm.
really was just, it was very spontaneous. And I don't know, I think everyone kind of goes through a poetry phase where they think that that's what they want to do. And I think this was just that I was lucky to come out with what would become this poem, but I wrote about like a person who couldn't swim and was thrown into the water, and was basically, the movement of the poem was sinking down to the bottom, and then like it got to the stingrays, and then like the stingray started speaking and started saying things. And then that poem sucked, but over time it became better and better, and I kept this, the remnants of the stingrays just became stingrays and not like the stingray, because I think the original poem had like, and the stingray opened his mouth. Oh my god, it was so bad. And then yeah, and then over time, and but the beginning, that destabilization, I remember that came, I think, in the summer of 2020. This would be 2021, I think, which is the summer I started reading Jory Graham, and I remember
Mm.
being taken over by that sense of, oh, like that sense of density, that sense of fragmentation, that sense of flair and style and punctuation, but also meaning. Like, if you can do that, I mean, it's her work that convinced me. You have two or three moves per poem to convince, which is not even lines, but moves
Mm.
of a poem to convince your reader to keep reading. And I learned that from her, and I continue to learn that from her. And I continue to explore how those first moves in a poem announce your consciousness, but also announce, as you say, the erotic, the sense of negation, the sense of the body, the sense of the earth flanking the sand, the sense of action. And so, yeah, it just felt, and to the degree that you're able to pick up on that, I'm really pleased. Of course, this is all intuitive, and I can't,
Hmm.
it's not, I didn't go back and say, great, now there's this and this, but I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
have to find a way for it to all be able to sit together.
Hmm. And that, like, blown from every direction.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like, in my head, it's not what that word's like. Blown from every direction is like
Hmm.
inward, but like in my head when I read it, it feels like outwardness, right? It
Yeah.
feels like the spread, and I think there's like a clever little trick there as well, like a conch shell where the echo of emotion in extremis, again, like
Mm.
lovely like repetition of that e, and we start to
Now that was conscious. Thank you.
but like there's also a different kind of rhythm, right, where the echo of emotion in extremis floods, like
Hmm.
it's much softer and kind of more rhythmic than those earlier more fragmented ones, floods
Hmm.
the chamber, and
Hmm.
like the chamber is like on its own there, and like that conjures up so many things as well, right? Like it's already here, like, we kind of have a sense of place and maybe time and maybe a speaker, but like the speaker of this poem is definitely not the speaker of all of the poems in this book,
Right.
necessarily for me. The language, I don't know, conch shell, extremis, chamber, transatlantic voyage, hushing, velocity. Like, there are certain kinds of words in here that not all of your speakers have, right? Like, they're talking in a particular mode or something, or lexis, and it feels grand, even while it's kind of saying, like, no, you don't get grandness. You're having pressure, you're having smallness, you're having the underside or the underneath side, you're having inability. So I think there's a really interesting tension that the poem is playing with.
I mean, I feel like that summer of 2021 and going into 22 is really important because it was the first time I learned how to write a poem that didn't rely on an I. I don't think there's an I in this poem. There is a you, but the you isn't necessarily me, or it is in sometimes.
Yeah.
And I felt like I just didn't know how to write a poem. And I think that was why this poem got revisited, because the first one was like, and I sink to the bottom and I start speaking to the stingray. And then I was like, how can I, it's a really powerful moment, especially if you're writing I lyric poems, where you recognize you can keep the lyric without the I, and then it almost gives you freedom to say more than you would have said when the I was closely based off who you, like who you are, which is, again, if just because you say I, it doesn't mean I, Seun, but get rid of the need to be an I, and it just becomes a space of text. It feels really empowering. And I remember writing a lot of my poems over because I was like, well, yeah, the I is just too, it's making this too specific, or it's making this too, this isn't me, or if people are going to assume it's me anyway because they need there to be a body or someone speaking, then why do I even need to say I? Because they're going to put an I there anyway. Then you see the craft task of how to avoid using an I actually generates other kinds of language and other kinds of sentences that don't need to satisfy the kind of fundamental structure of I verb, or noun verb, or you don't need this kind of clause that almost, it doesn't end, but it just kind of it provides certainty. And I read a lot of Carl Phillips, who was also super important to me, and a lot of John Ashbery, Robert Hayden. I mean, I do read James Baldwin, but not his poetry so much. And just this idea of suspension. I mean, I also read Garth Greenwell. I'm really, which I think, and I think, I don't know if Robert Hayden was queer. Was Robert Hayden queer? Everyone else I mentioned is queer. And I think there is also this kind of flamboyant style that I'm really interested in exploring. And so getting rid of the I also allows me to kind of play with non-normative forms of syntax that allow me to have the fragmentation and the kind of grand diction that I think you're picking up on. If I was writing more normative lyric poems, and I say normative not to suggest any shade to them, because they're great and we need them, but I just feel like I feel like that I would lose a little bit of the breath or a little bit of the velocity that I want the poems to have.
Because you're right, because it does force you into different kinds of language, different kinds of ways of making sentences. And the lines in this poem, blown from every direction into, comma, like, where once a body was willing to die inside of, comma, longing, right? Like, you set up things, then you're like, no, you're not having that. Like, even like the grammar, it's like the poem is kind of not training, helping us read it and read the book, maybe. I mean, I say this about most books, like novels as well. The first page kind of tells you what to do with the whole thing. Like, if you want to read it, like, these are the terms of the setup. And if you don't want those terms, like, that's a you problem, not a me book problem, right? And I think that where once was a body willing to die inside of longing, and you're like, does that mean die inside of longing, or does it mean die inside of blank longing?
Yeah.
And those multiple options open up so much space. And also, I guess, confusion in a way, right? I think the first time I was like, wait, did I miss something? Right. And I kind of like, okay, slow down, Chris. This is a slower poem than I might have thought it was.
Yeah, that longing. I remember the longing part. I feel like the word philosophy used to be in this poem. And I feel like it used to be where once was a body willing to die inside of philosophy, and then longing or something. And because I do remember always having an issue with the of there, because I feel like I remember thinking, oh no, this is complete. Where once was a body willing to die inside of, or was it always a fragment? I feel like the word philosophy did used to be in this poem. I edited it out somewhere around there, and perhaps that created the fragmentation, but longing was still there. And exactly as you're saying, like, yeah, it's of course it's both. It's lot inside of stop longing and then die inside of longing. And I mean, yeah, I think that's the hard thing with poems, at least that I'm always trying to investigate, is how can you allow multiplicity to exist, not only in the semantic formulation of what you're saying, but in the syntactic, in the structural or visual. And that felt like one of the parts where I mean, the syntax always felt normal to me, but I felt like, yeah, a reader might be like, I mean, when I learned about syntax, it felt like a really empowering thing, because syntax is really the pulse of thought or the rhythm of thought. And I don't think I have that many interesting thoughts that are so unique, and I don't think most of us do either. But I do think what is cultivatable is how you convey those thoughts. And it's actually not, I don't know if it's cultivatable as it is recognizable. I think we mostly have different rhythms, which is one of the things that AI does, is suppress us all into similar rhythms. But I think we all have kind of a unique, eclectic kind of rhythm, and the process of writing or whatever craft you do is just kind of about revealing whatever kind of pulse you have inside your body, that is a mixture of the speed of electrical firings in your head and your heart and the muscle capacity and the rhythm of your perception, how things come into formation in your head. And being able to really understand that that's what syntax is, not that syntax is often confused with grammar, and or that syntax is something that ought to be, if it's smoothed out, that's fine, but because that you're smoothing it out because you're wanting it to almost disappear. Whereas sometimes if you bring that syntax up, which I think I try to do in my bring up the appearance of syntax or the seams of it more clearly, working with non-normative structures, I think you're really training, as you're going back to, you're talking about training the reader. We are training, and that is something I think about in this book, but also in the next stuff I'm writing now, is like, yeah, you have a page to teach. That first page has to teach. It's a contract you set up with the reader, and as you're exactly right, they decide whether they can keep going, whether they want to keep going under those terms. But you do have a responsibility, I suppose, to, and of course you can play with those expectations. It's not that you can't break rules, and that honestly is what makes. But you set up expectations on that first page, and I think for the poetry book, I do try to really keep the sense of voice and syntax playful more or less throughout. So it felt like you need to get this, understand this now. But then there are other people who start just kind of very like, I think of the beginning of Post-Colonial Love Poem. I was taught bloodstones can cure a snake bite, can stop the bleeding. Like, oh, what a beautiful beginning that is, It's one of my favorite opening poems ever. It starts with the I was taught bloodstones can cure a snake bite. Finished. That is a finished fragment, or that is a finished sentence. And then we get the comma, can stop the bleeding. Most people forgot this when the war ended. The war ended, depending which war you mean. And it just begins to like unfold into this almost kind of like timpani, tympanic rhythm. And it's just so she starts with stability and then unfolds. Whereas I started with instability, and then we moved further into instability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like we could talk for 5 hours and not even get to the end of this poem. By the way, listeners, just to throw that out there. But when you said it earlier, it's kind of taken me back to, your kind of choreographic work where it's kind of started before the audience comes in, and you're kind of like, does that mean it doesn't need the audience, right? any kind of way it kind of does. And also there's I don't know whether there's another reading in there that you implied or not of like the audience doesn't have like a full claim on the thing. Like it's not yours just because you paid money, maybe, or not, to come see it. Maybe you bought the book, maybe you didn't. Like that there is a kind of that you don't have ownership or like claiming rights over this thing. Like it started without you. Oh well, like what did you, like this isn't yours to just consume. And I think there's some kind of like friction there in the same way that you're describing this kind of like showing syntax, like the friction, like when we tell people to like write proper grammar or proper syntax is, as you say, to hide it, is to make it frictionless, right? So that the reading experience is smooth and everyone is happy. But like that's the ultimate, falsity of realism, right? Like realism was designed so that you could be like, don't look at the words, like this is a real thing, this is a real person, right? Believe in the character. And it's like all the while it's constructed through language. That's just like a falsity. So I think adding the friction means that I've got to do something with it, right? Like I can't not do something with it because I don't know if that sentence is a full sentence. Thus, I have to make a decision based on that, right? So when you then say this line break is the obsession, you're like, wait, what's the this? Like I don't know if I can locate the this in this poem. This is the obsession. This transatlantic voyage spread on the page. And you're like, okay, so this is the transatlantic voyage, maybe, but like that, this could refer in different directions, and that is like this transatlantic voyage spread on the page like an oil spill, the blue and black arsenal of water hushing inevitably, which is just beautiful language. We should say just in and of itself. We don't have to decode it, but it's beautiful. But immediately my brain went, oh, he's referring to Alexis Pauline Gumbs' work, Spill. Oh, he's referring to Christina Sharp. Oh, he's referring to like all of these kind of like the image of like the oil spill, the blue and black. I then thought of what's the play that Moonlight is based on? In Moonlight, All Black Boys Look Blue. Is that the full title by Terrell McCraney? I think something like that. The arsenal of water hushing inevitably. Was it worth it? Worth it circles around you. Like suddenly, like the poem is beefing up, but it's beefing up to me, to like history, to like meaning, to transatlantic voyage. I'm like, are we talking about the slave trade? I guess we are, but like I don't know that for sure, right? I have a sense that that's what I'm gesturing to in the poem, but maybe not. And that's when all of these other kind of references came in. That I was like, is that just me reading them versus like how much of every text is like the amalgam of what you've read, what you're writing, and what the reader is bringing too. And that's suddenly where the poem like takes off for me. Like this is the obsession. I mean, if we could both agree on what this is, like that would be great. But the poem is like,
yeah, it is a big. I mean, right? Because that M dash is the. This is me reading it now, and again, not expressing my intention anymore, but just right. That closes because the beginning. That's the beginning of the poem, right? Like it began with the M dash, and M dash usually needs another M dash on the other end to. It's almost parenthetical or not. And so it's now this is the obsession. So it's almost like a reassertion of the poem beginning again. And this idea of the transatlantic voyage spread on the page like an oil spill. I was trying to invoke Blackness and the transatlantic slave trade and Claudia Rankine's work and a personal history at the same time. And I think the bold kind of thing that I guess I was uncertain about and still remain uncertain about is like whether it was the invocation of big history in the personal, which of course is not, that sounds like so normal of a thing to do. And actually, I don't know if we're ever not doing it. But it felt like, how can I talk about the transatlantic voyage? I'm writing this lyric poem that's going at the top of my book. And then I'm bringing it up to this idea of worth circling around me. And then this idea of the pointless competition, which I think there was, now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder, like, there was a kind of, because that pointless competition for me was very kind of clearly, like, there's an introduction of all these topics, right? As you said, the body, syntax, worth. I think writing as a whole is brought up in that last part, desire, light and dark as the kind of visual beauty. And it felt like this poem was like trying to introduce very quickly all these, or felt it had the capacity to introduce all these topics. But really one of them was like bringing up, can someone like me write about all of these, one in one poem, but also over the course of time? And also, do I feel as though I have the right? Do I feel I have the craft? Do I feel I have the chops? But do I also have the right, which is the increasing gap between the surface of the water and the stillness you entirely inhabit? Like, that is, it's not just time, it's not just distance, but this sense of being apart from a history that I am not experiencing right now, of
Yeah.
course, but also that I feel very connected to and that I understand. Like, can I be both in the now and, going back to what you were talking about earlier about being in the future, can I be both
Mm.
embodying that historic, the presence of that historicity, and also be this person who's just obsessed with grand language and colors and water? Like, can both of those, yeah, can that big history coincide with the moment of the lyric and the moment of the lyricist, which is me, in a way that doesn't feel, I'm not really into resolution. I'm not really into resolution, and I'm not really into uplift. And not that I don't being uplifted or hopeful, but I mean, like, I don't want something that's like, here's a slave trade happen and everything was horrible, and now I'm going to tell you how I worked my way out of the hole. Which is not to say that's not valuable, but it's just to say, like, what is the real affect you're trying to get? And I think there's definitely perhaps a insistence in the work that these things are ongoing, that I haven't figured out how to hold big history and the personal, how to hold kind of simple language that needs to be plain to make someone understand something, and then the kind of ambitious kind of obfuscation and beauty and spiral and variegation that I love and that I respond to.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think you are holding them. They do hold them, but like hold in in a very psychoanalytic way, right? Like providing space for, not definitively making sense of, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like holding as in like they are both there on the page.
Yeah.
What we do with them is like beyond you, right? And beyond, beyond even the text. But yeah, that's the bit for me, right? The increasing gap between the surface of the water and the stillness you entirely inhabit. Ooh, that entirely,
Mm.
without entirely, that line would just be on the stillness you inhabit. I would write that you inhabit. The entirely is the word that kind of like breathes out and in, right? Like there's something
Mm.
about that word that gives even more space in there, or in a space that already exists of this increasing gap. And I
Mm-hmm.
think like between the surface of the water, it then takes me back to the underneath side of the stones, right?
Yeah.
Like what is below water versus above water, right? As
Mm.
landed creatures, we're like above water is the place to be, right? But like just so many aquatic things, like no, that's the wrong way around. I talked to Victoria Adukwe-Bully last season about her poem The Ultra Blackfish, which is all about the kind of like depths of the ocean and
Mm-hmm.
space beyond human reckoning, and that not being negation but being like full possibility outside of our realms of what possibility means, right? So like a real wild poem that is in very direct language that I think is utterly brilliant. But yeah, there's another kind of element of that here, right? About like this other sideness or the underside or the gap, the space between, and
Mm-hmm.
desire, inseparability of light and dark, how beautiful you have been and are.
Mm-hmm.
That how beautiful, both about the inseparability of light and dark and the you, giving your whole life to a pointless competition, which, and then again, we end on a M dash, right? Like again, the poem kind of goes beyond us. But it is both a kind of like not negative, but there is a kind of edge to that last bit, to a pointless
Mm-hmm.
competition. Like there feels like a spike there. But just
Yeah.
before, we've got like how beautiful you have been and are. Again, it's the holding all of the things at once, right? This is not just ambivalence, it's like holding all of the options
Yeah.
and and that being okay and useful and productive. Not even productive. Just it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There are all the options at once. And I think that's quite a kind of radical place to end the poem.
I agree, and I think that edge. I was very proud when I thought of that edge because it felt. I mean, the poet who got me into writing was Louise Glick, and she was very formative for my early, and I'm still in my early years, but my earliest years, and it felt like the poem used to end again with this stingray speaking, and then I remember getting that how beautiful you have been. I think and are. I remember getting that and are and feeling really excited by the fact that those two words had arisen, um, and giving your whole life to a pointless competition. It felt edgy, and I was like, "What do you mean you're giving your whole life to a point? You've only been writing for like a couple years. Like, do you feel you can say that?" And like the pointless competition, I think it was again this invocation of it was a rebuff of the kind of person earlier in the poem was like, oh yeah, I can hold the transatlantic voyage, I can hold the personal. And it's like, well, but maybe at the end of the day, it's all pointless because you're putting it in a poem. And, I think I hear the sounds of poem and pointless competition. So you can almost hear, it feels like an expanded version of that. But a pointless competition is also just the practice of writing, like either competition with yourself to be better than you were, or an actual competition in the kind of industry as we understand it and trying to be seen. And so I think this goes back to this idea I was talking about, this idea of debuting. I thought a lot about what is that first poem that when you look back, you're going to say, this was the first thing that like was part of, like, if you put my books in a row, this is the first thing.
Yeah.
And I think that sense of the pointless competition for me was like a remind. It's a bit edgy. I think it tries to get a bit of the edge I so admire in Louise Glick's work, even though I don't know if it's naturally the kind of person that I am. I think I wanted to capture that edge, but I did want to, yeah, I wanted to look back and say, when I look back, will that sense of it being a pointless competition because you've sustained in the practice of writing over a life? Because in many ways it becomes more pointless if you begin to just enjoy the writing and you can just, like writing and keep, and like that is, so I think there's also a bit of hope in it. It's edgy to say it's pointless, but also to say like the pointlessness of writing and your desire to keep doing it, I think we're over time, and as you keep coming back to it, the pointlessness reveals itself even more, because it is just become a thing to do, and you don't do it because you're better or smarter or more interesting than other people. You do it because it's something for you to do. It's a way for you to spend your time. And I think I really wanted to remember, maybe in a couple of years or even now in this conversation, that it is that. And I don't say that to be like, again, there's no shade to writing. It's just to say like the writing is what matters. The competition of the writing doesn't matter. The competition of the personal versus the big history doesn't matter. The competition of instability versus clarity, of you versus I, doesn't matter. The writing is what matters. And so all of that is pointless competition, right? Yeah.
Okay, we've been talking for a long time about this poem, which I love. I want to talk about that writing then. You've kind of given hints about your writing process, and I kind of do want to see this original draft with the talking stingray. But anyway,
I'll find it somewhere.
so we've got to find that version. What is your writing practice, if you have one at all? Of course, like, do you write on your phone, on paper, on the computer? Is there a specific time of day? Yeah, what is your world of writing?
I generally write in the morning. My brain stops working at 12:30 generally, but I'm someone who can wake up very like 7, 8, sometimes even 6, and just be like, time to go. But around 12:30, it's over. So I write in the morning. Coffee is fine, and usually on like, if not an empty stomach, just like yogurt. At least the last year, it's been yogurt, kind of some kind of granola and like blueberries or some kind of fruit, just so I don't have coffee on an empty stomach. There was a period of time where I was just waking up and doing coffee until then, and then I'd go to the gym and then eat around 3. I stopped that not because it was unhealthy, but just because I kind of really started liking yogurt and granola. There are some days where I can still do that. I don't really like eating before I go to the gym. Yeah, so that's the practice part of it. Where do I write? Recently, this month, I've been writing a lot in the library. I got a membership to London Library for free after doing a
Oh,
reading.
she's bougie now. Okay.
No, no, no. It was for free, and it was paid for because I did an event there, and you could either get paid money or a free membership for a year. So I took that, and that has been one of the greatest things, because you just go there and everyone is just writing and everyone's just reading and stuff like that. So that has been my practice for the last kind of month and a half, is like getting up, going, and I can actually find that my brain can still function after 12:30 in a library. Maybe if it's not generating words, at least it can edit. I can edit maybe after 12:30, or I can read. So that's been pretty nice. But generally before that, it's just in my room. I try to write by hand, big passes of particularly narrative moments. I'm writing quite a bit of prose right now, and narrative moments more easily form by hand for me. Whereas critical thoughts, I think, is this true? Critical thoughts can come out by hand or by keys. Blending the two has been challenging because often I'm taking text, things I've written to the computer, and things I've written on the computer, and like, oh, I want to expand this more back to text. And then there's just kind of like this interplay and interface of those two media. So that is, did I answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, is poetry different? You kind of talked about prose and criticism, but
Poetry. Yeah. I take
that thing we've been talking about for an hour.
we've been talking about. Yeah, I take notes a lot in my I have a running list of lines and things from on my phone, just called notes. So I have notes for poetry, notes for prose, and notes for, I have another one. Oh, notes for raps, because there was a year where I got really into freestyling, and so I
Okay.
started writing down like rhymed bars. But my notes of poetry one has been running since 2018, which is when I moved here. And so I just add, often I'll think of lines or words, like for example, and I'll just write that down. It's like the last couple entries have been, I finger the proximal view of my eye and see him go silent as an anomaly. Fetched up, adjective. The fetched up wins syntaxes. You were wrong about what I said I chose. But you cannot ask something simple and human. I want you to ask something simple and human. I was born in the future. I'll die there. Threads of the book rather than chapters. Anyway, so yeah, I take notes on and then what will happen is I'll have a moment. I'm quite an ecstatic writer, which is why going to the library has been good, because you kind of need discipline, I think, for prose in a way that poetry does not demand. But I take notes on my phone, and then I'll say I want to write a poem. I feel enough notes have come to me, and then I'll just write by hand. With line breaks, I revise quite a lot as I'm writing, or I'll just start a poem with no notes, and then I'll say, okay, I've arrived at a moment of pause, or a moment where I feel like I don't know how to keep going, and then I'll go to my notes, say, okay, I need to keep going. It's not over yet, and I'll use my notes to turn or insert into the poem. And it becomes this kind of iterative process. And what's something that I talk about a lot is often I'll write a poem and I'll write a line that reminds me of a poem I wrote sometimes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years ago. And because I hope I'm becoming a better writer over time, I will go find that poem and then strip it of its best parts and insert that into the poem. So it can often start with just kind of improv off my head, then what's in the notes, then the notes trigger memory, and I go back and find that poem. I strip that poem into its parts. There's one poem that this has been happening with for like 3 years now, and like over and over. It was actually edited out of this manuscript, out of Strange Beach, but I don't want it to die because I just feel like it's relevant, or I need to keep it. And there's one poem that's just basically been latching itself on to the end of this long thing I've been writing for the last 3 years. So yeah, that's kind of how my process works.
I love that. I want to ask you, when do you remember first writing or thinking about being a writer or imagining you could be a writer? Any of the options there?
I remember thinking I could be a writer. I remember thinking I could be a reader when I was in 2018, before I moved to London. But when I could be a writer, it would have been around the time I moved to London. I got really into reading poetry that first year I moved to London. I was living in East London. I was buying novels and poetry more so than I ever had in my life. And I had encounters with some poetry, like the poetry of Robin Cost Lewis and Voyage of the Sable Venus, Claudia Rankine, as I'd said, and Bluets by Maggie Nelson. But these were just kind of little dips in the toe of dips of my toe in the pond of literature. Um, and I think the moment where I said I can do this, what was it? The moment I said I can do this. Oh, it was after the pandemic. I'd been writing poems seriously. I'd started sending them out, but I think it was still just kind of a hobby. And I remember I was in a really kind of not great relationship, or I was at the end. It started out great, ended poorly in 2020. And I remember writing poems throughout that time and showing them to my partner at the time. And he was reading them. He was like, "Oh my God, this is beautiful. This is amazing." So he was just like validating me. And I remember breaking up with him, and then couple months later, coming back to those poems and just reading the most heartbreaking, depressive. Obviously, this person needs some kind of pastoral care, like mental health. Like it was just abysmal. The mindset of the poems, and this was great because I was like, oh, right. So if I just write what I have the capacity to write what I'm feeling, because I did not know I was documenting my life through that time, right? I thought I was just writing poems. These were kind of survival tactics. My ex was seeing, these kind of very obvious signals of, mental deterioration. It was like, oh my God, that's so wonderful. And so I just remember feeling so riveted by, oh right, if I just document what's going on, whatever's happening will make its way onto the page. And that was really a moment I was like, okay, so now that I know I can do this, let me just try it. And so really it was end of 2020 when I was out of that relationship. I was finally getting my visa to stay here. And I was like, okay, this might be something I should pursue.
I love that. This is like a really interesting like formation where you see your own writing in a totally different way from how you'd seen it before. Last question that I ask everyone. You've given us so many book recommendations already, by the way. So like listeners have them all, but are there any particular books that you want to tell people to go read now? It could be old things, new things, stuff not yet out.
Stuff not yet out. I just got this book literally before I got on the call. Claudia Rankine is back. She published Citizen, I think in 2014, 15. She published Just Us in 2020, and she has a new book called Triage coming out this year. It's called Triage: Truth, Art, and Fiction. Makes me extremely jealous because I'm writing something that is kind of trying to hybridize those exact three kind of forms, but I'm sure she's done it better. And so I would say look out for that. I think it comes out in like September or October or something, or maybe August, sometime summer, end of summer, fall. Christina Sharp's Ordinary Notes. It's a good book. In the
Yeah, I don't know
Dream
what
House.
there is to say about
No,
that. I'm
yeah,
just always like, just go read it. I don't know what to tell you.
yeah, like just I finished that book really quickly, and it just teaches you a lot of ways that you can write. Yeah, full stop. In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I'm reading that. I think a lot of queers have read that, but I think it bears rereading,
Yeah.
and it's powerful. It's formally inventive and great. And then the last thing I'll recommend is maybe like a wild card. Maybe I'll recommend Intimacies by Leo Bersani and Adam Phillips.
What a
I
book.
just I like to remind myself that you can be dense, theoretically dense, and still very stylish and very clear. And I think sometimes I lean towards too much style such that I begin to obfuscate semantics. And I feel like that book, Intimacies, aside from discussing really, I feel, urgent topics as it relates to queer identity, also just finds a way to hold it with such kind of beauty and grace. And I think that's more than anything what I want my work to be: graceful. And I feel like the pairing of their works in this book, Intimacies, is just a masterclass in that grace. So even when you're talking about stuff that's really, even if you're talking about Jeffrey Dahmer, right? Like how you can do that with elan and grace it's very informative.
Yeah. You're speaking my language. Those three, but I'm like, yes. In the Dream House never leaves my brain. Like
Yeah.
ever. Like
Hmm.
how she did it, I don't even know. Like formally, emotionally, all the things. Like that book I'm like, if you want to learn how to write, like that is the thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Adam Phillips is like one of those people who, he'll just write one sentence. You're like, oh, you've changed my brain chemistry. Fine. Thank
Yeah.
you for that.
Yeah.
And he's just so unassuming. He's just like a very like sweet, quiet man who's just writing devastating lines about psychoanalysis that you just,
I think he just wrote something. He just wrote a new book called On the Good Life or something. Is it On the Good Life? Yeah, I think he wrote On Giving Up a couple years ago, and then he wrote. I think there's a new book out like last month called like On the Good Life or something, and I'm looking forward to reading it.
Yeah, I don't have that one yet. I think I have like almost every Adam Phillips book somewhere behind me here. So like, I will be going to get that immediately. Seun, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you massively.
Thank you. This has been super fun. And yeah, I'm still glad that people want to talk about this book because it's not old. And I think so much of my anxious brain wants to be like, this is old now. And it's just not the case. And yeah, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to keep bringing it into the front of my consciousness. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more on amazing poetry, go back to episode 15 with Jane Ye or episode 26 with Sasha Devivek McKenney, who is also published with Fitzcarraldo. Please subscribe if you haven't already, leave a review on Apple Podcasts and YouTube, share with people in all the places, follow the show and me on Instagram, tag me in any posts of episodes that you like, and if you can, please fill out the feedback form. You can also get show transcripts and more information by subscribing to the Substack. I am updating it slowly, I promise. This show is made possible by an Impact Accelerator Award from the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the University of Hertfordshire.